Good morning and welcome to the new edition of Dr. Lamba's Awakening Call. Sometimes I wonder how people behave or how they do not behave in our everyday life, in our daily intercourse. If some neighbor is poking his or her nose in our affairs, not only taking undue interest in our family matters, but passing comments carrying tales, we call that person nosy, peeping Tom, uncivilized, uncultured. And the same is true at the international level, where diplomatic niceties are very well demarcated and it is supposed that you are not to interfere in the internal affairs of the others. Most of the treaties, covenants, and agreements are based on that. But some people must be peeping toms, and they take specious pleas of being the good Samaritans. In the name of the human rights, in the name of being good people, they start interfering in the internal affairs of the other countries. And many times it's so impudent that one cannot imagine any civilized country and its civilized cultured leaders to stoop so low, only to satisfy a segment of their voting bank. And this is what I've seen, especially in Canada, a country of about 37 million people, a country which happens to be a member of the G8, courtesy Charles de Gaulle, a country which cannot protect itself and is dependent on its neighbor for everything, a country that has been endowed by nature with a great resources and could have been a leader in the world, but still is a leader only by giving foreign aid. When it assumes the role of a watchdog, of a monitor of unruly class, it at times becomes nauseating. Sometimes I think that the Canadian leaders, some of them, suffer from white man's burden. They still think is their right, God given right, to civilize the brown and the black. When shall they get over this colonial imperial hangover? I'm referring to the latest interference in India's internal affairs by the Canadian Prime Minister and the leader of a federal national party, I mean Justin Trudeau, and Jagmeet. I can understand Jagmeet making statement because his 100% base is that of those voters who have some connections with Punjab in India. But even he shows political immaturity. Prime Minister Trudeau was apparently siding with the farmers of Punjab. And he forgot that the agitation is not only by Punjab, it is by the farmers. He was not supporting the farmers. And incidentally, the same demands of the farmers are made here in Canada and they don't bother about that. The farmers are demanding something which is already there. And the beauty of the criticism of Trudeau and that of Jagmeet is that they have not either read the new laws or are blissfully unaware or prefer to be unaware of the ground realities. The Prime Minister of India has very clearly explained that the new amended laws in nowhere take away the minimum support price. And as I said yesterday, even otherwise, it's a state subject, and Punjab government by itself can take the action, so can Haryana, so can other provinces. And logically, MSP, the minimum support price, should be decided by the state depending on the various sectors: social, economic, cultural, inputs, other facilities provided by the government. And that's why the deficit sport price has been decided in very progressive states like Telangana and Madhya Pradesh, where the difference is the farmer can sell at any price, but the difference between what's a fair price and then what the farmer sells is paid by the state. That can be done by Punjab, but no, it's for political reasons. And as I discussed in my articles, economically, the farmers is much better off under these laws. Earlier, he had to sell to the markets, and now he can do it otherwise. And what's wrong with that? As a matter of fact, he has a bigger market to cater to, and the more the competition, the better prices he can get. Let's not forget the supply is limited, and if the demand is more, the farmer can extract more price. Secondly, the marginal farmer, would not sell to the corporates automatically because the corporates would not come to him until the farmer cooperated. But today I'm not talking about the law, its benefits for farmers. I'm talking about the undiplomatic conduct of Prime Minister Trudeau and absolutely jingoistic attitude of Jagmeet Singh. Now, the beauty is that these two gentlemen, though they are federal leaders, are possibly unaware that it is Canada which had complained against India about the minimum spot price that India had fixed up. A few years back, they had gone to WTO, complained against the MSP of the pulses because Canada is the major producer of lentils and pulses. And today, in fact, they are going back on their own complaint. What a diplomacy! If you can call it diplomacy, I'll call it, well, to be very charitable, lack of coordination or absolute ignorance of the facts. Then comes the human rights. Let's not forget, and as I wrote today in my article, the oxygen of democracy is protests. Protests are a fundamental right of any in any civilized community, and they're important, especially in a democracy. So, what are they cribbing about? Has there been a ban on the protest? No. They were allowed to protest, and the beauty is the government of India has invited the farmers for discussions. And the Prime Minister himself, in his radio broadcast and in his talks and in his speeches, have been unequivocal in saying that MSP has not been removed, it is still there. But this fact is suppressed from the voters. So this is basically a politically motivated protest. Even that's not being objected to, it's not been declared illegal. Facility. The only thing was that the government did not want the normal traffic to be disrupted. When hundreds and thousands of the people start moving on the highway, the normal traffic would come to a standstill and lose of us. You remember earlier these farmers had stopped the movement of the railways. They had started sitting on the railway tracks, so railways could not move. Very quietly, very gently, without using any force, the government stopped railways from moving. They said, okay, we will not move the railways. And now the problem started because Punjab was starved of the essential goods and they could not even get coal, which was necessary for the thermal power plants. So they said, okay, we'll remove the railway blockade. Good. Railway started moving. So the government has been very quiet and not been reactive at all. Had it been another government, there might have been firings. Here, only water cannons were to be used with a definite view that the people are not harmed. Of course, they'll feel uncomfortable, but they will not be harmed physically the way a bullet would harm or a baton charge would harm. So that was avoided. Now, coming to this, that they want the fundamental rights. The fundamental rights and the human rights have not been violated. And even if they were violated, what is this policy of criticizing India but keeping absolutely mum? Do you go deaf and dumb when it's China? In China, a million Muslims are interned. Their mosques are razed. The Quran reading is banned. The beards are cut off. And not a word of protest from Mr. Justin Trudeau. Sorry, Right Honorable Justin Trudeau. Why? Is he afraid of China or is he hand in glove in China? Now, the plea going to be taken is that there were protests in Germany in sympathy with the protests in India. Agreed. But they were by the private bodies. Chancellor Merkel did not criticize the protests or the government's reaction to it. You see, but then the reality is that the fools rush in where angels fear to tread. So, apart from being unfriendly gesture, this has been undiplomatic, it has been wanton. Now comes to what should be the reaction of India. Indian Foreign Ministry, the External Affairs, has criticized Justin Trudeau. But somebody yesterday called me and asked me, what would I do if this was to be done? Suppose I was the Prime Minister. My response was very simple. There are two options. First is to ignore it with the contempt it deserves, which the government of India has done, apart from a spokesman criticizing. There has been no reaction from the Prime Minister or from the Foreign Minister. The second is to recall the High Commissioner. And as a matter of fact, as a rising global power, India should do that. Not break the relations. No, I'm not saying that. Just recall the High Commissioner as a mark of protest. And we, in diplomatic language, we call it recalling for the sake of consultations. This will show that we really mean business and we will not permit intemperate, undiplomatic, impolite people to interfere in our internal affairs. I have every right to tell a nosy neighbor to keep his dirty running nose out of my business. That is India's business as well. Secondly, they are forgetting that what is sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. What prohibits India from moving a motion in the Security Council on the General Assembly condemning Canada for its treatment of the native Indians. They have been exploited, their lands have been taken, the covenants with the crown which they entered have not been implemented fully. The children were sexually assaulted in the residential schools. And even today, recently we saw the standoff in Ontario. The First Nations are an exploited lot. The human rights are being crushed. So why should India not complain against the violation of human rights, A, and violation of the guidelines of the UNO as far as the native people are concerned? Canada is guilty of that. And I think India should have done it. And if they have not done it, if and they have not done it till now, they should do it now. You have got to tell people that a kettle cannot call a pot black. First, look inwards you, introspect, find you whether you are lily white. And if you are not, you have no business calling the others that they are dirty. And that's what Prime Minister has done. He has done the same mistake which he did at that time when they criticized Saudi Arabia for human rights, and Saudi Arabia recalled its ambassador and told them to keep shut. And then they were contrite and they were putting sack and ashes and apologizing since they were losing a few $1 billion which they got from the sale of arms and the Arab place. Today the economy of Canada is greatly dependent even on India for its exports. If India was to ban the import of the lentils from Canada, their 30% of the income would be zero. It will be reduced with 30%. And India would be within its rights to do it. India can stop its students coming from here, and 40% of the foreign exchange earning by the colleges is from the Indian students. India can very well put an end to that. And then Canada would suffer. And whether India does it or not, I cannot say. That's up to the government to do it. And then the government of India doesn't want to precipitate matters. They are much more sophisticated and much more mature than the Canadian government is. But the whole thing shows three things. A, Canadian leadership gives scant respect to the international accepted principles of decorum and decency in not interfering in the internal affairs of another country. It is partisan in its approach, even if when assuming that they are right, that they are the custodians of the human rights, then they are partisan. They are not honest because they would criticize Saudi Arabia and they'll criticize India, but they will not dare criticize China or any other big power. Thirdly, they are harboring, protecting, promoting sectarian outlook, thereby dividing Canada. When the mainstream Canadian, the Anglo-Saxons feel that a section of the people living in Brampton, Mississauga, Surrey, Abbotsford, they are being protected, promoted, given places of honor, then naturally there's heart burning. So the whole thing is, in fact, injurious to the country itself. Apart from international repercussions, internally it's not a good thing. Ethically also it's not important, as I said earlier. First introspect, look behind at yourself. Are you lily white and honest? What's your behavior to your people? Would Miss Prime Minister Trudeau permit this sort of protest, which brings a whole city, especially in the times of pandemic, to a standstill? Suppose somebody was to blockade the whole of Ottawa tomorrow. How would Trudeau feel and how would Trudeau react? This criticism of India is immature, childish, undiplomatic, and it's time that the Canadian government wakes up, realizes its mistakes, and stops being Mrs. Grundy. And the sooner they do it, the better it would be. Thank you.